not only can these ideas, because they are now explicit and because they are fully expressed, not only can they live in a way that we can understand them, but they can live through time. And that's one of the greatest things about a book, is that it perpetuates ideas across time.
Hi, I'm Michael Hyatt.
And I'm Megan Hyatt Miller.
And you're listening to The Double Win Show.
So today we are thrilled to talk with Joel J. Miller, also my husband, about how books have literally built the world we live in. And there's some great application in this conversation for those of us who are thinking about what role reading plays in our leadership, our personal development, and where do physical books fit in with that? So you're going to want to pay attention to this conversation.
And I thought I would just tell you a little bit about him because I'm the proud father-in-law. But Joel and I, believe it or not, have worked together for over 25 years. He was my first editor. He stuck with me all these years and edited my stuff and turned it into better prose than I could have done on my own. The book he's just finished, and the book that we're excited about and want to talk to him about, is called The Idea Machine: How Books Built Our World and Shape Our Future. Joel is a former vice president and publisher at Thomas Nelson. So I had the privilege of moving him from Oregon, where he was living at the time, to Nashville, Tennessee, to be part of our publishing company. He's been the chief content officer at Full Focus for what, a decade, Megan?
More than that, I think, at this point, but yes.
Yeah, a long time. But he runs the show when it comes to content. He also runs a Substack newsletter called Miller's Book Review. And you can just go to millersbookreview.com and subscribe to it. But you will be introduced to some fascinating books, because the only ones that Joel reviews are ones that stand out and are extraordinary. He's obsessed with literature, big ideas, lives in Franklin, Tennessee with his family, of whom Megan is his better half, and he has 5 kids. So with that, let's talk. Joel, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Oh my gosh.
We are pumped to have you, and I'm super pumped to talk about this topic.
Me too. I love this thing. I've been working on it for years and years and years. So I'm really enjoying this part of the process of getting to share it now.
So Joe, you mentioned it, that you've been working on this for several years, but I want to hear about the process.
The process, the agony part of it, or just the fun part of it?
Well, I know the fun parts only occurred since you turned it in.
Yeah.
But yeah, so what was the agony part of it? I know you took several years.
I've been working on this project actually for more than 10 years. And basically, I had a book project that I thought was a winning idea. I thought it was a slam dunk. I took it to a bunch of publishers through my agent, and I got a bunch of no's. And so I worked on it some more and sent it back out again and got a bunch more no's. But in all of those no's, there were 2 very promising notes from a couple of editors who said, we'd really like to hear more about this idea. And this happened to be about the history of books. And I thought I could absolutely flesh this part out, this part of the proposal. I could flesh that out into a full book. And it won't take me that long. I know everything there is to know about it. Ha, ha, ha. I got started, and 10 years later, I finished.
I mean, that is just a life story right there.
Totally.
That's clear back when you had hair.
I know, not very much, but yeah.
Okay, one of the things you say in the book is that the book is maybe mankind's greatest technological achievement. So why do you think we overlook it as a technology?
Well, okay, so the Idea Machine is a history of books, but it's not just a history of books. It is a very particular kind of history. It's an analysis of the book as an information technology. And what I argue in the book is that all of the kinds of, developments that we've had as a civilization have been dependent on the book. And we don't recognize this, and we don't even recognize the book as an information technology because they're just so boring and ubiquitous. They're everywhere. You walk into an airport, you go into, somebody's house, there's just books everywhere. Like I got thousands of them behind me. We just have books everywhere in our lives. And so they're not that interesting to us as a thing. Maybe we go to them for their content and we love them for their content, but we don't think about the fact that the format itself and what the book represents and how it came to be is so instrumental in shaping our culture.
That's fascinating. I think this is important for our community in particular because we have a community of readers. Now if you're listening, you may think, well, I don't read physical books, and I want to come to that, Joel, in a little bit. But this is a community of people who read because, as the old saying goes, readers are leaders and leaders are
Right.
readers. And I think that our people, as people who care about growth and achievement and human potential, care a lot about reading. So what did it look like for people who cared about achievement before there were books, and what has it made possible with the advent of books?
It's a little tricky to answer that in that we've had books as a part of our cultural toolkit for a few thousand years, but the mass availability of books is a very recent phenomenon. We sort of think of like the printing press as coming around, and that'd be like the 1450s. And all of a sudden, books become more ubiquitous because printing makes books just much more accessible. And that's true. But it wasn't until steam powered presses in the Industrial Revolution that we actually began to get books that just are everywhere, like bazillions of them. And it takes bazillions of books in order for them to become ubiquitous enough that the average person can afford them and can use them for personal growth, and all kinds of different types of literature for personal growth. So really, I would say that kind of use of books is really only about 150 years old.
If you think about too, in the 90s, right, books became available on Amazon. And then I don't know when that really peaked in terms of, what we think of today, where, you can have a book on your doorstep by the time you get home from work from Amazon, or
Right.
even this afternoon if you wanted it. And then audiobooks, like to the point of accessibility,
Yes.
those two things all by themselves have dramatically changed how accessible books are and where we can access them and listen to them, in a way that in human history has never occurred before. Wasn't like people were, taking a scroll into the bathhouse and, like, catching up on their reading while they were, in a Roman bathhouse somewhere, more than likely.
Yeah. I mean, that kind of thing could happen, but it didn't happen often because the average person was not literate. Literacy in the historical sense is, like a very recent phenomenon that we would have mass literacy. And that's in part because of mass books. Like if you didn't have the ability to read, you wouldn't have the need to, and you wouldn't ever do it. And so those two trends kind of go together. But, the internet has made all of this available now, whereas before you would have been limited by what was in your local bookstore. And you probably didn't even have a local bookstore. It was popular in the 90s to beat up on Barnes and Noble because they were busy putting out independent bookstores out of business. But that was really only true in large metropolitan cities. In like suburbs or small cities out in the hinterlands, Barnes and Noble was like a refuge for people. It was the only bookstore they had.
Wow. If you look back over history, and correct me if I'm wrong, and I totally get that there's a huge gap between the invention of the printing press and then mass production of those books.
Mhm.
But still, even prior to mass production, books were shaping movements and civilizations and all of that. Or am I wrong? In other words,
You're
is my
100%
my
right.
perception is that the foundation of every social movement, almost, let me just qualify it, almost every social movement, there is a book at the foundation.
There's a lot of truth to that. This gets back into kind of the deep like archive of what the book is and what it can be and why it has the effect that it's had on our culture. Because it's not just that a bunch of books are available to the average person and they can grab one and read it and learn something about their future or how they might conduct themselves in the future or something like that. That's all good. But that's not actually the real power of books. The real power of books is so much more true to like the basic early history of it, which is that for the first time ever, people were able to write and formulate crystal clear ideas. If you think about what happens before writing, everything has to be communicated orally, and you only pick up the gist or remember the gist of what somebody says. And the gist is not enough for when you need some particular formulation of an idea. And you cannot have an idea that scales without a particular formulation of it that everybody can return to and look at. So if you look at Jewish history as just one example of this, you've got the famous scene when Josiah has become the king and the temple is a mess. And so he's got his guys out there fixing the temple. And the high priest comes and he finds this book that they haven't seen in God knows how long. Turns out it's a part of Deuteronomy. And the king reads it in front of the book is read in front of the people repent, and a whole new social movement happens because of the reading of that book. And the same thing happens again later on when Ezra brings back a bunch of Israelites from captivity in Babylon. When they all come back, he reads from the law again, and a whole new change in that culture can happen. But only because everybody has recourse to the same book, to the same words and the same formulation. Without that, it's just every man for himself.
What's really interesting, you and I come from a publishing background. We spent most of our careers in the book publishing industry, but how did that shape your research, your interest, what you were looking for, what you found, et cetera?
Well, so when I got started in publishing, I just kind of fell into it. There's a guy in publishing, Bill Erdmans, who ran Erdmans Publishing, who used to say that somebody would fall with their butt in the butter, meaning they fell in a good situation. That was kind of me, how I ended up where I ended up in publishing. But I didn't know anything. I knew how to be an editor, and I kind of learned that like in the process of doing it. And I learned how to be a publisher in the process of doing it also. But one of the things that helped me was I went back and I started reading the memoirs of publishers and editors and learning kind of how to think like a publisher or an editor based on those books. But the more I read the history of publishing, the more that took me to the history of the book itself. And that's what set me off on it. Once I started to see just how fascinating this history of the book itself was, I was hooked. I couldn't stop thinking about it or couldn't stop reading about it.
Okay, I want to ask if you could do this for us. Could you give us sort of the arc of publishing? Where did it start? Where did it go to, and where are we now? But just a history of it so we can fully appreciate it.
Well, in the earliest days, publishing was an oral phenomenon. It would be people like bards or poets or whatever who would present an idea in a public presentation. It wasn't even connected to a book or a text. Writing comes about not because those guys need some way of capturing their thoughts, but because accountants need some way of keeping track of records. So the invention of writing is mostly attributable to accountants needing to figure out, how much grain the king sent to so-and-so or who owed what to whom. And out of that, writing developed. And as writing developed, people began to just capture more and more ideas in those days, it would have been clay tablets or possibly papyrus scrolls, things like that. Those ideas were captured. And the idea of publishing would have been to take that stuff, depending on if it was worthy to be heard by an audience, and reading it to them. And so in the early Roman, period, or the Greek period, there were things like public recitations of books. That's how a book was published. A guy wrote something and he would go present it to an audience. There was no big wide audience for books, and nobody was publishing books in the way that we think because there was no literate populace. There was some people that were literate, and they might ask, hey, could I get a copy of that? And they would have a scribe or a slave even like transcribe that for them, and they would have a copy. But that's literally how you got copies of books back then. You went to a slave or a freedman who was a scribe, and they would like write it out for you, and one at a time. And that kind of one at a time publishing was happening literally until the printing press. So over the course of the ancient period and then into the Middle Ages, publishing basically meant copying manuscripts. And it was a one-off thing and very slow. In the course of the history of the Middle Ages, if you look at a bar chart, you've got just this tiny ripple of new books being produced. And then you hit the 1450s with Gutenberg, and it's like it shoots right up. And that's because it took that long for mass production of books to actually happen. But then you get into the like steam-powered printing presses, and then it's a totally different ballgame, because publishing a book one sheet at a time, or printing a book one sheet at a time, is how the Gutenberg press worked. It worked that way really all the way until steam-powered presses, when they began to put them on what are called rotary presses. And all that mechanization meant that they could produce thousands of books in an hour, as opposed to, just like one uh, over the course of a day or something like that. And that meant that you could actually have a true, what we would think of beginning a publishing industry with like real publishers who are taking ownership of real IP and sending them into stores and all of that kind of stuff. And so that's a fairly modern phenomenon. And the world that you and I stepped into, you earlier than me, but when we got into publishing, we were on maybe even the downslope of that, because the peak of that was really in the like 70s, 80s, and 90s. And then it began to fragment and kind of struggle. And as that began to happen, we get this, because of the internet, we get all kinds of other modes of publishing, all kinds of other modes of distributing ideas. And that really starts to change the way publishing works till where we're in the environment we are now, where it's very decentralized.
I want to go back to something that you were talking about earlier, where you were talking about the fact that the book made it possible to take an idea and perhaps ignite a whole social movement because it was possible for a group of people or a large group of people to be aligned around an idea that was consistently communicated,
Hmm.
to a whole bunch of people. One of the things that I find fascinating about the application of this book and this idea of books as technologies is you talk a lot about that in order for us to communicate well as leaders, as people who have ideas, as people who want to do things in the world, even if you're not technically a leader, but you want to have an important impact in some way, is the need to make the things that are in us and in our own brains both explicit, meaning like, you know, they're outside of us in a way other people can observe, and specific, like clear
Hmm.
in their communication. Can you talk about that for a minute? Because I think, one, this is something as a coach, when I'm coaching CEOs or business owners, I find this comes up a lot because they're frustrated with their, for example, very practically with delegation. It's like,
Hmm.
why can't people ever do what I want them to do? And it's the answer is usually like, well, because you're not actually communicating what you want to do. You have an idea of it, but it's not out there. But then I think more broadly, just communication in general, and in terms of getting people on the same page about things, being able to move people to action in a meaningful way, for something good. This is a very relevant idea, kind of in your way of thinking. So talk to us about that.
This is a core concept in the book itself. So the idea machine is 16 chapters, and it follows the book from the earliest development all the way up to AI. And all along the way, I try to point out how that dynamic that you just described is in play, that the book helps take ideas that start in the mind of an author as just kind of a gooey, fuzzy idea, and in the course of writing, it forces them to get clear on it. It forces them to get specific about it and develop it in a way that actually becomes useful. And then the publishing process, the book itself, then enables it to be accessible to other people. So it can be fully expressed in a format that other people have access to. Without those two things, you really don't have communication. You have maybe some kind of fuzzy idea, or maybe even some crystal clear idea, but it's just stuck in your head. You need some way of taking it from fuzzy to clear, and then from, centered within you to public. And to go from public, or to go from private to public, and from vague to specific, is kind of the challenge of communication. Everybody, all of us, face some version of that in every version of our jobs. But books are an example, like a very hardcore example of how that happens in a format that can then live beyond the moment. Because, St. Augustine did that with his Confessions, and we can read it now 1500 years later. And that's astonishing to think of. So not only can these ideas, because they are now explicit and because they are fully expressed, not only can they live in a way that we can understand them, but they can live through time. And that's one of the greatest things about a book, is that it perpetuates ideas across time.
I really do think that writing and reading do make you more clear.
100%.
We get a lot of podcast pitches, people that want to come on the show as a guest. I get them home probably 2 or 3 every day now. I have a basic screening device that I use. And first of all, like 1% or less of those make their way through
Mhm.
because we have such a long list of guests that we want to interview and are proactive about that. But occasionally you get pitched something. But the screen for me is, does the person who's getting pitched or is pitching, have they written a book?
Mhm.
Now, that could seem like a really arbitrary kind of artificial thing because there's obviously, you don't have to be an author to be somebody who matters or somebody who's making an incredible impact in the world. But I use it as a proxy for clear thinking.
Mhm. A book forces you to get clear. It forces you to develop an argument. It forces you to develop a line of thought that other people can follow. And without that, you're kind of left with a grab bag of ideas that are probably cool. They're great, but they're not in a system that can be used or explained or anything like that.
It's funny because, that has no relationship to how passionate someone is about the thing that is their
Mhm.
idea. I can think of so many examples of talking to people and within myself where I've been really fired up about something that mattered deeply to me and for very good reasons. And when I started talking about it, it was like kind of word salad, as we say sometimes with our teenagers, they start talking about stuff and it's like word salad. Like, what are you even talking about? You're talking
Right.
in circles. And it is hard work to get clear. Joel, you know this intimately because you've been helping me with this, but I've been working on a new training that I'm going to be doing for our community. And I've been working on it for about 6 weeks, maybe longer. And I mean, every day I'm working on that thing. And I have an external coach that I'm working on it with, and he and I are going back and forth, voice noting each other, 3 to 5 times a day of, okay, I'm going to do this. What do you think of this? Okay, no, it's like this. Do it differently. And it is just really hard work to take something that I thought I already knew at the beginning. Like I
Mhm.
would have said, I have an idea for a thing, and I'm going to go talk about it with people. Like I might even have some expertise around it, but being able to communicate that in a way that truly is clear, I don't think we appreciate how challenging that is, nor do we give it enough time and effort on our part to do our best communicating, and that really limits our impact and our ability to persuade people or move people to action. Which, I don't care what kind of job you have, that's probably a core thing, even if it's just wanting your boss to give you a raise, But for
Absolutely.
for most of us, there's all kinds of things even beyond that.
That's why even something as simple as a pitch within an organization, it ought to be a memo. Like, you should go to the
Yeah.
discipline, go through the discipline of writing it out, whatever it is, even if it's just talking points. Because otherwise what happens is you might mistake your own passion and heart and, like high feeling for having thought it out. And then what you'll find out is you're 30 seconds into the presentation and you actually don't know how any of this stuff fits together. And you're just hoping that people will pick it up on vibes, and they can't, because whatever's in your head is limited by however thick the bone of your skull is. It can't go past that. And the only way it can go past that is through your mouth and or or eyes through reading. And that means that you have to formulate this stuff in a way that is accessible to people. And that means you got to put it in written communication in some form.
It's funny, I coach also, like Megan does. And I have so many leaders that get frustrated that they can't get buy in from their team.
Mhm.
Or in situations where they're in a corporate environment or even a ministry environment, they can't get buy in from their board
Right.
or they can't get buy in from their boss. And 99 times out of 100, it's because they have no idea what they're asking for. I mean, it's
Right.
just sort of a
Mhm.
vague thing, and people aren't going to sign up for the vague thing until there's more clarity around it. And it's amazing how when you get more clear, and I couldn't agree with you more, write it out.
Mhm.
Make the case, argue the point. Don't expect people to read your mind. They can't read your mind.
They can't do it, even if they want to. I think this is true for leaders that they have a lot of personal charisma and people want to follow them, but that's not that's not enough. You really do have to go to the discipline of like getting these ideas clear for yourself so that they can be clear to other people. Otherwise, you really are just like cooking off vibes and it's just not enough.
Cooking off vibes.
Yeah.
Clarity sells.
Yeah, 100%.
Because I think there are a lot of people looking for direction. They're looking for, could be as simple as they need direction on how to cook some food item. or it may be that they need, direction on how to handle this situation at work, whatever it is. But they want clarity. And when they get clarity, then all of a sudden, bingo, they're on the path to resolving that issue or getting the help or making the thing or whatever it is. And that's where books are enormously valuable. Have you always been a bookophile?
Yeah, not to the extent that I probably have developed over time, but I grew up in a house full of books. My dad was an English teacher. My mom, loved mysteries and espionage thrillers and stuff like that. And so there was just a billion books in our house, and um, I just grew up around them, and I resorted to them for my own entertainment from a young age. Went to the library, but like going to the library was a fun thing for me, as a kid. But the older I got, and then the more professionally attuned I got to books, the more interesting it became to me. So I think like the path was always there, but I have cut off all other possibilities at this point. Like that is the only path available to me at this point.
I can confirm that and say that the Amazon man or woman, and there are many people that come to our house on a regular basis, are very often delivering books. And I would say on average, Joel gets 5 to 10 books a week. Do you think that's true?
Yeah, during certain
Probably.
seasons, or if like when I'm working on a
Yeah.
project in particular. Yep.
Yeah. And our kitchen table is usually about halfway covered with books because those, as Joel would say, each stack represents like an idea or like a
Train of
contingent
thought.
component of an idea that like it's all
Hmm.
related. And, the kids know like don't mess up the piles because if you mess up the piles, you mess up the brain. Like ask
Yeah.
dad and he'll move them. So that is true. Okay, I want to shift gears a little bit, and I want to talk about reading books in our daily life for a minute because obviously we're married. I watch you read books all the time. You, for the most part, read physical books.
Hmm.
We are a company that loves analog technology and loves the value of, for example, um, the focus that comes from using a physical planner versus like an app, for example, for productivity. We've stood by that for a long time and really believe that that's helpful. I want to just like take a second and tell you, this already, Joel, but Dad, you don't know this. I want to tell you about this experiment that I'm doing on myself, and I want you to tell me your thoughts on it. So I have not read a physical book. I listen to books on Audible all the time,
Hmm.
and I listen to podcasts and stuff like that. But I mostly never read physical books. Like I have a lot of books. I will use them to jog my um, interest or like thinking about what I might want to go listen to. But sitting down and reading a book like probably has not happened with any regularity in over a decade. Almost exclusively audiobooks. And lately I have been thinking to myself, I don't know that I like the trade-off of that. I mean, for some things, yes, like I was listening last week to a book about investing, and it's like it's really more conceptual, it's not technical. Like I just kind of want to get the big idea and move on, right? So like I did listen to that. But then there's some other deeper work that I'm doing for our work at Full Focus, research related stuff, and I can't remember anything. Like I
Yeah.
can't synthesize it and put it back together, I feel like, when it's in that audio format. And that's becoming frustrating to me. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to do this experiment on myself where I'm just going to read physical books, anything that like matters, that I'm not, it's not entertainment, it's not just something I'm trying to like kind of get the big idea and move on. I'm really going to read a physical book. And so a couple things that I found so far. Number one, when do I do that? And I know that sounds like a silly thing to say, but like when you've been listening to audiobooks, when do you do it is anytime. So anytime you're in the
Right.
car, when I'm getting ready. I mean, good grief, I could put a speaker in the shower and listen while I'm in the shower. Anytime I'm anywhere doing anything else, cooking dinner, et cetera, I could listen to an audiobook as long as I wasn't trying to talk to other people, right?
Right.
So the real question of when do I read a physical book? And then I had to come to terms with the fact that I was going to read way slower than I could
Yep.
listen. And that was, like, jarring, like, "Oh my gosh," like, I've been reading for an hour and I've only read, like, 30 pages, or I don't know what it was, but, like, it's a very different experience of consuming information to do it in that context, and I'm kinda struggling with that. Like, there are things I like about that. I like making notes in the margins because it helps me connect the dots for things I'm writing, but it's also very frustrating to me. So, is there a case to be made for reading physical books? And if so, what is it and how do we do it? Because I mean, literally, I'm not sure I know how to do it after spending a decade of listening.
Let me take that in a few different ways. The first one is I would point to behind me, this bookcase behind me.
Yes.
People don't think about, I mean, well, like when we think about an analog book, we think, oh, it's like an analog book. I mean, it's a physical thing. It's not, we don't think about things like user interface or things that we would think about with apps, for instance. But this is like one of the greatest user interfaces ever created because this is like a screen and I have access to, by looking at those spines, whole lines of argument. I have access to whole trains of thought just by looking at the spines of those books. I don't even have to be close enough. All I have to do is be close enough to kind of recognize them. I don't even have to be able to pull them off the shelf to have that, the ability to do that. And so, like, as an external part of my mind, which is what a bookcase is, it is like a book itself is this. It is an externalization of your own brain. It's like extra scaffolding for your brain. I have access to tons of extra ideas just by looking at the spines of those books. Which, if I were limited to thumbnails on my phone or thumbnails on a Kindle, I wouldn't have access to because I would have to like manually thumb through like that entire uh, archive of stuff on my phone or on my Kindle or on my Audible app.
Joel, is that valuable if you're not a writer?
Yeah, 100%. If you're thinking about anything like, and we're all in knowledge work in one form or another, you know, like if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably in some form of knowledge work. And that means that you are frankly handicapped by the kind of knowledge you could have access to, but don't if you're not surrounded by physical books. Because physical books actually prompt thinking just by virtue of being able to see them. And so if you had, like, if you've just even thumbed through, call it 50 different books, and you had them on a shelf around you, you would have access to those ideas just by looking at them because they would prompt memories that would be useful to you. But let's talk about your own situation here on like time and how do I get good at this again and that kind of thing. I think it's just a practice thing because some books I read very slowly, other books I read very quickly. Some books you find that you can kind of get started reading and realize this book doesn't warrant the kind of like deep super engagement. I can probably get through it actually in a couple of hours if I just kind of read quickly and do a cursory read of it. You'll still get all the goodness out of it that was there for you because that's all you were going to get out of it anyway, but you didn't have to invest 2 weeks to read it. At the same time, you'll find there are books that do require you to really be in it and you may write tons of notes in it and all of that. And that goes back to this user interface thing. A page, just like, you know, the screen on your phone, that's a user interface, or an app screen, that's a user interface. A page is a user interface. And there's useful things about that. The margin, how you find different pages, the notes you make in those margins, and how they link back to other things. You can think about marginal notes and things that say, like, check page 57. Like, that's a hyperlink in the book back to another idea in that book. An index is like a bunch of hyperlinks to a bunch of ideas in a book. Once you kind of get mastery of the physical shape of the book, again, what you find is it is an amazingly efficient tool for communicating ideas, for accessing those ideas again. And I think part of what we've done is we've just like de-skilled ourselves in reading. And we just need to reskill ourselves in reading so that we are taking, maybe it's just 30 minutes to an hour a day, like 30 minutes at the top, 30 minutes at the bottom, and just spending time in the book itself. And what happens is that those skills will come back to you. The ability to speed up or the ability to be more discerning in what needs to be read closely or what doesn't. All of that just kinds of happens with practice.
What do you do about the frustration that it's slow? Like, well, so I'm just narrating my own experience here.
Yeah,
Maybe others of you are better than me in this, but this is what I'm thinking. I'm thinking to myself, in the 2 weeks that I've spent working on this book, you know, in the margins of my life, because I can't do it in all the
sure.
margins of my life, it's much more limited. It's gonna take me forever to read this book. You know, instead of reading, you know, 20 or 50 books this year, maybe I only really have time for focused reading like that of 10 or 12 or 15 books. And that means over the course of my lifetime, I'm going to read a lot less books because there's a real capacity lit. For example, I can't listen to them at 2x speed. You
Right.
know, I have to read at whatever my natural reading speed is, and maybe I can read a little quicker, or whatever. How do you deal with the opportunity cost of reading physical books? Like, how do you offset the loss of opportunity in terms of scale of ideas you can be exposed to compared with the depth of what you get from reading in at a human speed as opposed to mechanized speed?
Well, for one thing, I don't think I would limit myself to one format only, because I would say, for instance, that supplementing an audiobook with a physical book enables you to get the benefits of both. So if there's a book, for instance, there's a book right now that I'm reading that I'm having a very critical argument with this book. It's kind of popular. A lot of people are talking about it, and I've started reading it. All right, when I started reading it, I realized I'm going to disagree with almost everything in this book. And so I was started off listening to it actually in the car line, picking up Naomi. And I got home from picking up Naomi, and I grabbed my physical copy, and I started underlining and making notes. And I've kept listening to the book, but every time I come back to it, I make all these notes in the book.
Hmm.
And so I think you can kind of multi-format your way through some of this stuff. I don't think you have to be completely dedicated to one format or another. The other thing I would say is that some books, well, it kind of depends on what you're trying to get out of that book. If you don't need to retain it, or you don't need to have access to the kind of level of precision that you're talking about, like let's say the book is more for entertainment, then by all means just listen to the audiobook. That's no problem. And go ahead and give yourself the permission to do that. And if you're going to be listening for or reading for like these kind of like hard takeaways, and you want to walk away with a really synthesized version of what this author is saying, then I would go ahead and I would read physical. I would just give myself time in the day to do it and take the pressure off myself that I somehow have to finish by a certain time. I would just, like give myself the permission to read the book for what it is.
I read mostly ebooks, and I know the advantages of analog.
Hmm.
I know that it's physically more in your face. It's easy to uh, forget books when you read them on an ebook. But I like the portability of ebooks.
Sure. Yeah.
And I can remember back, this was like right after Kindle came out. Well, it was probably several years after Kindle came out, but Gail and I went to Africa, and she's a reader. And she literally had one suitcase that was nothing but books.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, I had a Kindle, and I had 10x, maybe 20x the number of books on my Kindle that she had. But but I don't know. I like Megan. I struggle with this too, and part of it is, this may be me being jaded as a book publisher. There are so many books that should have been essays,
100%. So true.
and so many of those even. I've heard you say this before.
Yeah.
Should have been probably like short articles or
There-
blog.
There's there's an article. There's a statement by Al Regnery, whose father was the publisher Henry Regnery, and Al Regnery was involved in Regnery Publishing. I'm pretty sure, but he was also the a magazine publisher, and he was kind of famous for saying that most books should be magazine articles, and most magazine articles shouldn't even be written. Just to address the ebook thing real quick, I think portability is awesome, and there's just trade-offs. Like, you can listen to a ton of audiobooks in all this interstitial time that we have driving here, doing chores, whatever. That's awesome, but there are trade-offs. You're not going to be able to get the level of deep engagement that you get from a physical book. And the ebook is awesome because you have portability, and you can you can have like 1,000, 2,000, 3,000. I don't know how many you can have on a Kindle ultimately. I've got like maybe 500 books on my Kindle, but I also know I never go back to them, and I don't read them or look at them or benefit from them in the same way I do physical books, because I even forget that they're there. I just like they're invisible to me. So there's just trade-offs.
Joel, one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is, again, as you well know, is the idea of human limitations. And I
Hmm.
think I'm probably in a season of my life where I'm bumping up against this a lot, and it's creating a lot of friction for me. And I'm also asking myself the question, like, what might actually be good within our human limitations that we consider to be a bug but is actually a feature. And so
Sure.
I'm thinking about things like our native capacity, our native speed, even just like walking happens at a certain speed, like kind of throughout all time, and there's something really good about that. Like going faster than that is there's negatives and there's real benefits of just, walking at a human speed. And I think about reading at a human speed and consuming ideas at a human speed. And I think the friction for me is I don't like the idea that I'm not going to be able to potentially consume as many books. Now I know what you said about format and all that, so it makes some of that moot. However, there is a reality. If I'm going to read important books deeply that I want to be shaped by, and that's really what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about things that are kind of ancillary to that, but books that I want to shape me. If I'm going to read them deeply, I'm going to read fewer of them. I'm going to be
Yep.
shaped by fewer ideas. And I think that's helpful to just say, like, to be honest about it, and then to have to come to grips with, like, there's a sense of, like, almost greed that I contend with in myself, that, like, I want more. I don't yeah, I wanna read deeply, but I also wanna do that at scale, and it's like, well, you get to choose. You're
Well,
gonna get to choose at some level
yeah.
between those two
The math
things.
the math is just not working for you regardless, because
Right.
there's like 500,000 books that get published every year. I mean, I don't know what the exact number is, but it's pretty close to that. And that's an absurdly large number. And that's every year. How many books you can read in a year? Let's say you're a pretty ambitious reader and you read 50 books a year. I mean, that's totally doable even for somebody who's as busy as you. 50 books a year, 500,000 books a year. You're going to read a few thousand books and then you're going to die. And like, that's all you get. And that's
Yeah.
okay. Like, that's just like, that's the math. That's all there is.
So will there be books in heaven, Joel? That's the question.
Jorge Borges, or I think that's how you pronounce his name. He imagined like heaven is a paradise is kind of like a library. So maybe we just
Okay,
get to
good.
keep
We're gonna
reading
just count
forever.
on that.
Yeah.
I would be remiss if I didn't bring in the topic of AI. We were
Hmm.
talking about books, but you have this in the book, and I ran into it separately from that earlier this week. I think I may have pinged you about it, but Socrates was very skeptical of writing anything down because he felt like it would atrophy our memory.
Yes.
And I hear this argument all the time with the AI technology. We're going to lose the ability to think. And I can remember when the first Hewlett Packard calculators came out, people were saying, we're going to lose the ability to do math. And they weren't wrong. But what we gained from that, was something extraordinary. But how do you see the interplay of AI and books in the future?
Oh my gosh. So this is a big open question. And it's one that's I deal with in the idea machine, going all the way back to Socrates and then looking all the way into the I don't go into the future, but I do talk about AI, because the truth is AI is actually an extension of the book. And if you look at the history of library science, the internet, and all of that, AI like just comes right out of that. The internet comes right out of that.
Mhm.
They're all intimately related to each other. And so if you're one of these people that sees AI as somehow like against literary culture or against the book, you've kind of maybe haven't heard the story, because they're like friends. They've been together from the very beginning. Humans have this need to create metadata to get access to the data that they create, and we create tons of data. We always have. Like going back to the beginning of time, humans have been creating information, and it's hard to access it. And so humans have created metadata and various searching methods and all that kind of stuff. And at every stage of humans trying to figure out some new way of managing data better, like writing or AI today, there are people that come along the way and say, that's terrible. And Socrates was one of the first and one of the most famous, because he has at least one major dialogue of Plato's, the Phaedrus, where he comes right out and talks about how terrible books are. You can kind of go back to him as like the original Luddite on information technology. But he was wrong. And not only was he wrong, he was a hypocrite. If you actually look at his own practice, which is recorded in these other books, you can see that Socrates used books. He talked about how he used books. He talked about how he benefited from books and so on. And Plato, of course, did. And Plato published those dialogues. So the idea that books are writing is somehow going to damage our own cognitive abilities is, like I get it. I get why Socrates says that. It's right there in the argument. However, it's wrong. And we've got now, 2,300 years or so of proof that he was incorrect about that. And I'm pretty sure that's how AI will work out. Uh, we've got this long trend of information technologies. The book is kind of the foundation of it. AI comes out of it. And I believe that over time, we'll just find humane ways of using AI that reinforce the things that we hope to get from it. And so I don't think that kind of like anti positioning is going to help anybody. Also, you can't win that argument because no one individual controls any of this. This is an emergent phenomenon that comes out of like a marketplace dynamic, and no one human controls that. Even if they have regulatory power, they can't control it. They'll just maybe manipulate it in some way. So there's no way for us to control this. What we really can do is figure out how to use it well for ourselves and then hopefully model that for other people.
Joel, you may have read this, but I'm now seeing a lot of authors who, in the publication of their book, are also publishing a custom GPT that's been trained by their book so that readers can query against the book. So it's like you get the package or you get a link in the book to get it or whatever. But I think that's kind of a neat idea too, because like any technology, it leverages human strengths.
That's fascinating. I had
Yeah.
not seen that. I know that in when I listen to an audiobook, I noticed that there's now a feature in my Audible that allows me to query the book. So they've obviously plugged an LLM of some kind into the Audible app that allows me to, query the book. That makes tons of sense to me because that's actually one of the original ideas behind AI, LLMs. The original idea behind them was that we needed some way of getting beyond the passiveness of a page where a book could actually serve information to us. And search engines were a part of that plan. That goes all the way back to like Tim Berners-Lee when he was talking about the web and he was, kind of describing the invention of the web. He talked about the ability to have automatic processing of data and serving us data coming out of that. This goes all the way back even further to essays written by a guy named Vannevar Bush in the 1930s and 40s, where he described having a machine, he called it the Memex, that would be a desk. In his version, it was all analog, but fed by microfiche. But the idea is that it could actually do data processing on the backside while you weren't even there. It would put together data for you and then serve it up to you. So this desire for humans to have machines give us the data that we need to work has been around as long as humans can imagine it.
Mhm.
And in this case, that's like literally over 100 years because it wasn't even Vannevar Bush. There was a guy before him named Paul Otlet, who was a Belgian librarian who had cooked up this idea of basically creating the idea that you could have all the data of the world available in card files, and you could call up some central office and they could serve it up to you. And then eventually somebody created the internet, which was what that was. And so the need for this has been around forever, and we're finally actually experiencing the fruit of it. And of course, it's uneven and lumpy, and it doesn't work great all the time, and there's all these concerns, but it's kind of magical, and we should kind of appreciate it for what it is and then make it work better, not just like beat up on it.
That's good.
Okay, last question, Joel. I know we're about out of time, but I want to know with regard to AI, what's the dark side though, with regard to ideas or writing in particular?
Well, Michael mentioned this with math and calculators. We talked about this with just like leaving physical books and moving to audiobooks. There can be a de-skilling, and critical thinking is a skill. And if people kind of de-skill their critical abilities or never develop them, that could be a real problem for sure. This is not a political statement. This is just a reflection of our own political climate. We don't live at a time where people are critically engaging that much on ideas. It just feels very reactionary on both sides.
Mhm.
And I think some of that is that there's just no patience for critical thinking or critical evaluation. And we should hold on to that as tightly as we can. And so we should be using AI to help us with that, not to replace that. Because if we lose that, that's a problem for sure.
Megan said that was the last question, but she was just kidding. Maybe her last question. I have a last question
The
too.
last.
And that is, if you could design a double win reading habit for mere mortals, not the Joel Millers who
Yeah.
walk amongst us, what would that look like on maybe a daily or a weekly or a seasonal basis?
Well, I would say it should be daily. You'll never pick up a habit unless it is daily. Um, at least that should be the intent. And I think I would just say everybody should read, I mean, at least 30 minutes a day, better an hour. And the best way to do it is to just take, say, 30 minutes at the top of the day and 30 minutes at the bottom of the day. You can move through a lot of pages with an hour a day. And it's just like with exercise. The minute you start getting momentum and start feeling the difference, the more self inspiring it is and the more self motivating it is. And so if you just kind of like treat it like it's a chore and you only do it a little bit every day, you'll never get anywhere. It would be like convincing yourself to exercise and then you go lift some barbells like 4 times in a morning and then quit. You'll never develop the habit. You really need to expose yourself to enough books over a period of time that you develop a love for it. And it's not that hard if you do it at 30 minutes to an hour a day. Just give yourself some time at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day. And one other thing to remember about reading is it's kind of an interstitial thing. For whatever reason, reading is not a main thing for almost any of us. So unless that's your job somehow, and it really isn't anybody's job, although that would be a great job. But because it's not, if you have a book with you, just think about it this way. Like whatever you go bounce to social media, try to bounce to a book instead. Because if you would, or some other thing like that, something that diverts your time in a period where you're not otherwise occupied, allow a book to be part of your range of options in that moment. And I would say pick something that just interests you. So never read a book because you're supposed to. Read books because they delight you. Read books because they're entertaining to you. Read books because you get something out of it that you really like. So Alan Jacobs is a professor at Baylor. He talks about reading by whim. Just follow your whims. If something looks good to you, if something looks cool, great, read that. Don't take somebody else's recommendation as something like you have to read it and then do it.
Would you agree with the advice that not every book has to be finished?
Oh, never. Like if you're into a book a little ways and that author hasn't done the job of securing your attention, feel free to put it away. That may be a deficiency in you. Like I'm open to admitting that. Like I have never finished a Dostoevsky novel ever. I'm happy to admit that that's a deficiency in me, and someday I'll be a man enough to finish a Dostoevsky novel. But I'm not gonna beat myself up about it. At the same time, I'm not gonna like soldier through something that's gonna prevent me from reading other things that are more enjoyable or more useful to me right now. So if a book doesn't work for you, fine, it doesn't work for you. Just like people, not every person works for you. It's the same thing. Just like go on to something else.
I love it.
Okay, Joel, on that note, we're going to transition to the 3 questions that we ask all of our guests.
Mm-hmm.
And the first one is what's your biggest obstacle in getting the double win right now in this season? And by that, I mean winning at work and succeeding at life.
So books can contribute to a kind of distractibility for me. If I have a lot of things going on and yet I feel the pressure to finish reading a book and review it, for instance, or I just am obsessed with a particular book and I got to finish it. Like I just feel compelled to finish it. That can come at the expense of my family in a way that is not helpful. And so like one of the biggest obstacles in getting the double win for me is just me and not able to like, give myself guardrails.
Second question. How do you personally know you've achieved the double win?
Well, being on the background of this podcast since the day it was started and having heard the answers of so many other people and all the conversations that we've had about it, the kind of default answer is peace. And I kind of agree with that answer. It's just that simple. I feel settled. I feel at peace. I feel contented when I'm there. I don't feel harried. So I would say tranquility is kind of how I know personally. If I feel tranquil, I'm there.
Okay, lastly, what is one ritual or routine that you rely on to get the double win?
And it can be reading.
It can't be
It
reading.
can't be
Well,
reading.
the alternative answer to that would be walking. I find that walking is a tremendous way to A, get physical exercise, B, be outside. And that goes in any weather. I mean, walking in any weather is worth it, even in the rain sometimes. And it just allows your mind to be free, and you can kind of free associate, and your brain will come back recharged and ready to think about new things. And it's awesome. Walking is like a superpower. I don't know why more people don't just take it up. It's like the easiest thing to do. I mean, you got all the equipment you need. You just like open your door and go.
I'm sitting here right now and I'm looking out my window and it's a beautiful day. And I'm like, as soon as I'm done with this podcast, I'm going to go walk around the block because I just feel the need to move. And I love that you can do it like slowly. And
Totally.
I don't know, it just feels so human.
Yeah.
Joel, thanks so much for joining us today and sharing some of your wisdom with us. I have a feeling about this book, and I've told you that from the moment I heard the idea.
Hmm.
I just have a feeling about this, that this is a good moment for this book. And I wish you every success.
Thank
I
you.
hope you hit the New York Times bestsellers list. I know that's not your criteria for success. I just hope that it explodes.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I think you're right. I think it's a great moment for this idea, the idea machine, because we're at a time where, as a culture, we're concerned about AI. We're concerned about all these different cultural trends, and the history of the book actually addresses all of them.
Okay, guys, the book is called The Idea Machine: How Books Built Our World and Shape Our Future. Megan, what did you think about that interview? And of course, it was your husband, so we get that. We'll factor.
It was so fun. I mean, I have not read the book yet. I can't wait to read it. But I have lived through the entire writing of the book, and I've talked to Joel about it over the last decade plus as he's been in process for this. And I think the thing I love about Joel is that he sees the world from a contrarian, novel point of view. He just doesn't see things the way most people do, and consequently it opens my eyes, and I hope it has been the same for you listening. It opens my eyes to a different way of seeing the world and thinking about the very real circumstances and challenges of our lives. And so I think there's some great takeaways. Like I love how he said just read 30 minutes a day. Like, Joel is so good at like don't make it harder than it needs to be. He's a simplifier by nature, and I think that makes it feel doable. It makes me want to keep leaning into my own reading habit to reestablishing that, even though it's easier to do something else, that there's a lot to be gained by using not just the information in the book, but the technology of the book itself to aid in my own intellectual and personal development.
What's really interesting is, I was fishing this last week in Montana with a group of 19 other guys. And one of the guys that I found the most fascinating was Carey Nieuwhof.
Yeah,
And the reason is that
love
Carey
him.
reads so much and he had so much to contribute, not in a showy or flashy way, but he would say, "Oh, that reminded me of this, the Delusion of Crowds or something." And he would cite that book, or he would cite some other book. And man, I was taking so many notes on books that I needed
Wow.
to read. But I do think that one benefit, and I've certainly seen this in Joel, is when you read a lot, you have a lot to contribute. If your life is about service and contribution, this gives you the raw fodder
That's right.
that you can contribute to other people's lives. And frankly, from a selfish standpoint, it makes you more interesting.
So true. Well, I was newly inspired again, and I just want to encourage everybody to go pre-order the book. And also, we didn't really talk about this in the interview, but Joel has a Substack newsletter called Miller's Book Review. It's millersbookreview.com, where he reviews books every week in his newsletter. And it is fantastic. I mean, it's just everything you just enjoyed about that interview you get on a weekly basis. And that's a great way to kind of keep up with him and get in his brain even more. And it's an interesting brain to be in.
Again, guys, the book is The Idea Machine: How Books Built Our World and Shape Our Future. Really encourage you to read this. I think it'll give you not only the history of books and their impact on civilization, but just to see the arc of history and to see that it's really moving towards something. I don't know what that something is, but books have been a large part of that in shaping us, in shaping the cultures that we live in, and hopefully shaping the future. So until next time, get the double win.